If you followed the headlines over the last 2 years, you've seen the same pattern of anxiety. Programmers being laid off, hiring freezes in Silicon Valley, and the fear that a single AI tool can now do the work of a dozen entry-level engineers. A team at MIT recently analyzed this trend and found that the public discourse is focused on the wrong metric. Their study suggests the disruption isn't occurring at the level of the job title, but within the individual tasks that make up a working day. When an algorithm automates a specific workflow, the job itself often remains on the payroll. Instead of the role disappearing, the hours required to perform it simply begin to compress. Take an accountant. They might spend 60% of their week on routine document processing and data entry, and 40% on complex judgment calls and client relationships. Automation targets that first 60%, leaving the high-value human interaction intact. This means that automating the majority of a worker's time does not necessarily equate to automating their economic value. The anxiety is misaimed because it treats every hour of work as having the same vulnerability. The difficulty is that our current economic system is built to count people and job titles, rather than the internal tasks that fill their days. Standard metrics like GDP and unemployment were designed to measure high-level output. They were never intended to look inside a profession and identify which specific skills are technically capable of being performed by a machine right now. Because official data only tracks when a job disappears entirely, the shift occurring at the task level remains invisible to regulators and businesses alike. This leaves governments attempting to prepare their workforces using obsolete maps. They are looking for a collapse in employment figures, while the actual structure of work is changing beneath them. To bridge this data gap, MIT developed the Iceberg Index. This tool is designed to map the exact overlap between AI capabilities and human skills. The researchers used the Department of Labor's ONET database to create a digital representation of 151 million American workers. They broke down nearly 1,000 different occupations into their component parts, things like critical thinking, data analysis, and coordinating with others. They then cataloged 13,000 real-world AI tools currently in production and mapped them against those exact human skill sets, creating a direct comparison between what people do and what algorithms can handle. Crucially, the index does not measure time saved. It measures the economic wage value of the work AI can technically perform, identifying the specific dollar amount of labor that is now exposed to automation. By focusing on wage value instead of headcounts, the index identifies where the true economic exposure sits within the U.S. economy. At the visible tip of the data, AI can technically perform work in the tech sector, accounting for $211 billion. That is roughly 2.2% of the total U.S. labor market's wage value. This small percentage has been the primary focus of every major policy paper and anxious headline regarding AI layoffs over the last 2 years. When the same methodology is applied to the whole economy, the submerged portion of the iceberg is revealed. The exposure climbs to 11.7. This is due to their heavy concentration of administrative and financial back-office work, the exact tasks sitting in the gap between technical capability and current practice. The primary fault line of economic disruption does not actually run through the tech campuses of Silicon Valley. It sits beneath well-paid white-collar professionals whose work is built around processing and summarizing information. This leaves 30% of the workforce with essentially zero AI exposure. The nurses, plumbers, and mechanics doing physical, hands-on work. While their tasks remain human-centric, they face a different kind of economic pressure. To understand the risk to these jobs, we have to look at an economic pattern identified in 1965. Economists noticed that a string quartet performing Beethoven in the 1800s required 4 musicians and 25 minutes. A century later, the performance required the exact same amount of human effort to produce the same result. However, as manufacturing and industry became more productive, they could afford to pay their workers more. This pushed wages up across the entire economy, and musicians had to be paid competitively to stay in the profession. This is Baumol's cost disease. Because human-centric jobs cannot use technology to speed up their output, they must raise their prices significantly just to keep up with the rising cost of labor in the rest of the economy. In industries where the work is stubbornly human, the lack of automation leads to a rapid increase in the relative cost of those services. If AI significantly increases productivity in cognitive and administrative roles, the price of essential human services will rise in comparison. A financial analyst might do a day's work in an hour, but a nurse still needs the same amount of time per patient. These human-centric industries, healthcare, elder care, and education, are necessities that society cannot easily opt out of, even as they become more expensive to provide. If we continue to use measurements designed for a different era, we risk a fracture in our economy. One side will see massive gains in efficiency, while the other side struggles to fund the essential human services that society depends on.